Okay, so you probably heard that.
Yep.
We're recording. So just kind of wanted to build on some things that you talked about last time. So tell me
Yeah.
more about Grandpa's cows. Were those Guernsey cream cows that you were talking
Oh
about?
yeah.
Yeah.
They were beautiful. They were very tame cows. They're good. We had a dog that would go down and chase them up to the barn, and we'd put each one in that stall and milk the cow and get them out of there and get the next batch in, and it was good.
How many cows are we talking about here?
I think he had about 8.
Okay.
He
So
and
it's
Grandma did most of the work, most of the
okay.
milking, and Katie and Martin did. They never let me milk. I'm not sure why,
So you
but
never
I didn't
milked a
mind.
cow?
Huh?
You never milked a cow?
I milked it once or twice, but that was about it. I
No.
was a sickly child, so I think they were afraid to let me do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you probably didn't miss that much.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So these are strictly dairy cows. Did they ever slaughter a cow? Ever make any steaks or
Not a
anything?
cow, but they slaughtered beef that was going to go to market. We slaughtered our own for eating ourselves. And back in the old days, when you slaughtered, we didn't have a freezer like we do now.
Yeah.
Mom got a great big freezer. Oh, I don't know, when I was in high school, I think, that we used for meat. And we would slaughter the cow and take it to town then and have the butcher cut it. You also got, had the beef skin, so that sold as well as the meat and things like that.
So
But we
what
were
are
never
you
hungry.
slaughtering? Are you slaughtering those Jersey cows or is this some other
No, not
cow?
Jersey cows. You slaughtered
Where did you get the
Herefords.
cow that you slaughtered?
We slaughtered Herefords that were just meant for slaughter for
Oh,
food.
so it's kind of like killing a bird sort of a thing. You would buy the cow and slaughter it and
Yep.
take it to town. But that's a ton of meat. I mean,
Yes, it
like
is. And the brothers shared both the stud and the meat and the slaughter process. They all worked together. They were kind of a commune.
eh, somebody home?
Yep, Molly just came in.
Hi, Molly. Hey, so we're talking about mom's cows being slaughtered. Well, not your cows, but you would bring a cow in for slaughter, and you would take it downtown. And where did you keep all that meat again? You kept it like in a
Well, we had what they called a locker, which was
yeah.
near the electrical plant that produced electricity for the city. And there were great big drawers, and it was ice cold in there. It was like a huge refrigerator. And it had, I don't know, 100 or 200 drawers that you kept your meat in. And you rented it from the electric company.
So basically, you rented a meat freezer,
Yep.
and were they good steaks?
Oh, marvelous. Yes.
Yeah, sounds like that would be
Daddy knew how to feed it. That's for sure.
Danny,
Daddy, my dad.
Daddy. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that sounds like that would be. How many steaks would you get? Do you think, or how long would you?
Oh, I have
You
no idea.
yeah, probably
We
a couple
had
of
a
thousand. Or
rib roast, and that was a set of like 14 ribs or something like that, 28 ribs.
wow.
Uh, ah, excuse me. I'm going to go back a little bit, though. I want to tell you a little bit more about the history of the farm families that I came from. They were some of the first to come to Nebraska after the Louisiana Purchase came through. And they advertised in Bohemia for those men to come to America. My grandfather Shanka, great grandfather Shanka, came first. He was one of the first people to cross the Missouri River and come into Abbey, Nebraska, where he lived for a long time. He built the first Bohemian Catholic church, if not the first Catholic church in the eastern part of the state.
Yeah, and I should probably explain
Um,
by Bohemian, you mean from the region of the Czech Republic called Bohemia.
right.
Because
It
when people
was
hear Bohemian, they always think of those hippie poets from the
right. They
50s or
think of a
something.
culture, not a
Right,
not
right.
a
But you
country.
just mean Czech people basically from the
Right.
region
They
of
were.
Bohemia. Yeah, yeah.
And so they came first. His He came from Bohemia because his sister kept bugging him to come to America. They're giving away land, and he first lived across the road from his sister, had a farm in a little place called Marion, Iowa, and then they had a 7-year drought there, and so they decided to move on. So My grandfather and his family went to Nebraska. As I said, they were one of the first families in Nebraska. And then his sister went to Kansas, and we connected with that family in my generation's time, but I didn't know them very well, at least. And they were a great family. My grandfather, that great grandfather, had like 12 kids, and my grandfather had 7 boys and 1 girl. So he bought each of his boys a farm, but he did expect to be paid for it. And in his defense, he bought them a farm. In their defense, they had to pay him. And my mother told a story about during the Depression, they had just corn cobs to burn for firewood to keep warm. And Grandpa came to the door and asked her for the money for the rent. And she said, "We don't have any money." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll just take the cobs." So,
Wow.
so they practically froze to death. But in his defense, he did have, he was kind of the baron of the land. They owned about 1,000 acres, I think, altogether at that area. And Mike and Eldon left because the work was tough and it wasn't productive. And Daddy almost lost his farm during the Depression. That wasn't affected by the Depression. It was affected by the Dust Bowl. Yeah. And so Daddy went to his uncle, my grandfather's brother, to borrow money. And my uncle said, "No, thanks. You're going to go down. So I'm not going to be part of that."
Wow.
So he went to the bank in Columbus, Nebraska, and he did business with them forever after that. They were they were good farmers. Mike and Eldon were, the guys were all very attractive men. It was tough times. They celebrated as much as they could and partied as much as they could because it was pretty tough times. And so anyway, Eldon and Mike did well by leaving. They did, and I think they helped their brothers a lot financially and probably every other way. They were good people and they shared a lot. And they all did well.
So wait, no, your grandpa, your dad's dad, was he the first one over from the Czech Republic? Like he was from the Czech Republic, from Bohemia?
No, his father was Matthias.
So your great grandfather.
Yeah,
your great grandfather. Okay. So
and then he had a bunch of boys. I don't know, maybe 10 boys, and my grandfather was one of those boys. They stayed in Schuyler. I'm not sure where all the other Shankas went, but they stayed around Schuyler, most of them.
And what was your grandfather's name?
Matthias. My grandfather's name was Wesley Shanka.
Oh, so that's who Grandpa's middle name was then.
And then his wife's name was Barbara Heine, and I think it's spelled Hajny. And I have her history as well. She was as I said, they went to Kansas. And anyway, it was a very interesting time, very hard work. The Dust Bowl was very tough. I was born like in the last severe year of the Dust Bowl, and I almost died as a result of the Dust Bowl. I was very sick. My Aunt Els took care of me and I lived, but it was pretty tough. The first 6 years of my life, I was off and on. I had a tonsillectomy, adenoidectomy, appendectomy, croup and whooping cough, pneumonia. The first 6 years of my life, I was pretty sick. So Mom didn't send me to school until I was about 7 years old. Oh. And they put me in kindergarten, but then they put me in the first grade right away. So I was okay. But yeah, it was tough. And farmers had a tough life. Daddy had a plow, but no tractor when he first started farming. He used a horse to pull the plow. They had a big wagon that they mowed the hay and raked it and put it on a big wagon and took it to the corral and put it in the haymow. They didn't have a lot of luxuries, and it was pretty tough working. That was my grandfather Shanka and his wife, and then my grandma Jonas was married to a Jonas who actually attracted those farmers to America all over. The Bohemians came because he was a diplomat and he urged them to come. They came through, surprisingly, Racine, Wisconsin, which I didn't know until I moved
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, there's a statue
Mr.
of Charles
Jonas,
Jonas. Yeah.
Mr. Jonas is reportedly related to my grandfather Jonas, and I'm not sure how. His name was Karel Jonas, and my grandfather's name was Václav Jonas, and I think he was my grandfather's brother, but I'm not sure. And
Your
so those were the
grandfather who had
Jonases.
your
And
grandfather
then
Jonas.
my grandmother, who married the Jonas, her name was Folda, and they came through Wisconsin to Nebraska eventually. And they were the ones that became wealthy bankers rather than farmers. And my
Yeah.
grandmother inherited the farm because she was the only one, she and her husband were the only ones that wanted to farm the homestead. So they farmed again until the Dust Bowl, and then they went down, unfortunately, with the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
The Foldas were very important to the settling of Nebraska, like the Shonkas were. They built the third house in Schuyler, Nebraska, that became, well, now it's a nursing home, I believe, but it became a doctor's office that my great aunt, she was a Jonas, was a nurse, and she ran the hospital after a while. So they were all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It was a great big,
Foldas
it was
had
still
those
a
kids.
great big house, stucco house on one of the main streets in Schuyler. It was the third house built in the town, and they were really important to the development of Schuyler and Nebraska.
Yeah, and so Schuyler, that's the town. How far is that from Omaha, would you say?
Oh, about 65 miles.
Yeah. So it's a small town, but it's not really in the middle of nowhere. It's,
No, and it became very important. They had outside of the city, and it's probably where my grandfather Shanka decided to settle, was because they had a cow corral where the train would pick up the cows and take them to Omaha to the butcher
yeah,
market
Omaha
in Omaha.
steaks. That's what they're
And
famous for.
the highway so we had the railroad, and they had a big corral there for the cows to take them to the city. But they also had Highway 30, which was the first national highway in the United States, went from coast to coast, also went right past our house. So Grandpa Shanka had a great idea. Wesley was landed right in the right place for a farmer. He was very close to both the corral and the highway, and things were good.
So Wesley, so that's who your dad's middle name was named after then, Robert?
Right,
Wesley
Robert
Shanka.
Wesley.
But it sounds like Grandpa Wesley was kind of mean. He took their
He was,
corn
he was,
cob. I mean,
he was, but in his defense, he got all those guys a farm.
I guess.
He lived off their rent, but that was 7 farms, for God's sakes.
So Highway 30, was that the Lincoln Highway?
Yep.
It went from, so I didn't know, it went right basically through your property, so to speak, went right by,
Just
or
about, yeah. We didn't own any property across the highway, but it was very close to our property.
so Grandpa Wesley probably got some money from the government, I would think. That's eminent domain,
Yeah, they
right?
all did. They got a little bit of money when they came through. There's 2 books out about the Lincoln Highway, and one of them has a story in it that I think is my Uncle Leonard's story. He had a farm, and just like my dad, but his house and barn were closer to the highway. So when they came through to build the highway, they got paid a certain amount of money to take the land and build whatever. But Uncle Leonard took his cows across the road to a pasture. So they had to build kind of a bridge over that part of his land. And so they were building it, but it was a hole at first. You had to go down into the hole and back up on the other side. So he got his horse out there to help people pull through, but he charged everybody $5 a pull. So he's standing there one day, and this guy comes along the highway, and Uncle Leonard's standing there with his horse, and he says, the guy in the car said, "So I suppose there's a fee for this?" And Uncle Leonard said, "Yep, $5." And the guy said, oh, well, that's way too much. I'm going to do it myself. And he said, okay, go right ahead. And this story is in the Lincoln Highway Stories. Anyway, the guy goes down into the ditch, and of course he can't get up the other side. So he says, okay, how much now? And I said, $10.
Yeah.
So he made a little bit of money on that.
Uncle Leonard continues to be a problem.
No, he's not a problem. He's a smart man.
Yeah. So what do you mean he would get them out of the ditch? Would he haul them out with his horse or something, or what?
With his horse. He'd
Like
attach the horse and pull him up the hill.
So he would hitch the car to like a team of horses, or
Yep.
what?
Uh-huh.
Those those must have been some big old horses then. Like,
yeah. Oh, they were huge.
Yeah. And you had a horse when you were a little girl, right? Sometimes, or
I did. I had a little pony. My dad had a horse. He'd go down the pasture and herd the cows and drive the cows down to the pasture with his horse. And it was a big horse. It was a big pinto, I think. But anyway, he was a pretty big horse, and his name was Pet. And I loved Pet. Pet was such a sweetheart. So I was going to ride him one day. I got back on the saddle, and I got up. I was probably 7 or 6 years old, and I got up on the horse, and my dog got jealous of the horse that I was sitting on, and he bit his heels, and we took off for the barn, and I fell off in a mud puddle. And I got up. My mom couldn't see me. She didn't understand where I was. I got up, and I was full of mud, of course, and I had to go to the hospital and be checked out, but I was okay. So she never let me ride the big horse again. I couldn't ride the big horse, so they got me a little tiny Shetland pony, and we were always in the Labor Day parades. And Skylar, my sister, Katie's sister-in-law, Jerry Havelka, and I were always got dressed up in some kind of stupid outfit and got in the parade and had a great time. And then after that, school would start, so I keep the horse at Grandma Jonas's house where I was staying while I went to school. And I'd take it they let me bring it to school and let all the kids ride the horse during recess. So I was the most popular kid in town for a while. I had a horse.
Yeah. Well, a Shetland pony, that's basically a permanent pony, right? It's like it never gets big.
It never gets very big.
Right. It's technically not a pony, it's a horse, but it's just a really tiny horse.
Yeah, but they were mean as all get out. They were just I had to go down to get my pony every year on my birthday, and it would kick me in the rear end.
Nice, happy birthday.
Yeah, happy birthday.
But you just had that one pony?
I just had that one little pony.
What was its name?
Dusty, because every time you slapped it on the butt, you had a cloud of dust coming out of its butt.
So that was a male Shetland pony?
Yep.
Yeah. So you would ride a pony to school as a girl, though?
No, I did not. Martin and Katie did. When I went to school, they closed the country school. So I had to go to school in town from the time I was 6 until I graduated from high school. And my dear grandmother put up with 5 or 6 of us at all times, because we all had to go to school in town. It was right after the Second World War, and farmers got a lot of gas, but they had to run tractors and trucks. So, and there were no school buses, so we couldn't go back and forth every day. So my brother and sister and my cousin, sister and brother stayed with my grandmother for 4 years, and I stayed there for 12 years with my grandmother. And
really?
I had been
which grandmother is this? Your
Grandma Jonas.
So your mom's
Libouchet, yeah, mom's mom.
Okay.
And her husband died when I was about 7. He was young for our family. He was only about 75 when he passed away. Yeah. And I was about, I don't know, 4 or 5. He was a sweetheart. He would lay in bed, and he had a terribly big swollen belly. I don't know if he had a liver problem or what went on, but he had a very swollen belly, and he'd be laying in bed, and he'd pretend to be asleep when I'd come in to see him. And then the ritual was I'd poke him in the belly, and he'd pretend to wake up and go, "Oh, Roberta, you scared me." But anyway, he was sick for quite a while, and then it was very fortunate that he passed, because he was in a lot of pain. Yeah. But he was only 76, and my grandmother, his wife, was 92, and my grandpa and grandma Shanka were also 92 when they died. So we've got a lot of longevity. Yeah,
well, good. Happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So, So where did Grandma Joan, like, where do you live in town? You live in Schuyler, like basically downtown, or what?
No, it wasn't downtown. She was on the edge of town, and she had a big yard. She loved to garden, and she loved being a farmer. It was very sad that they lost the homestead, but she had a huge garden. She had tomatoes and carrots and all kinds of vegetable garden. And then she had a huge tulip garden that she planted very carefully in rows of colors, like red, a patch of red tulips and a patch of yellow tulips. And it was a beautiful garden. And people would drive past just to look at her garden. They'd come past the house just to look at the garden because it was so beautiful.
What kind of a garden was it? Flowers? What was it?
Mostly flowers, but she had some vegetables as well.
Yeah, cool. So basically you really lived in Schuyler most of your childhood
I
from
did. My grandmother was really pretty much my mother.
yeah.
I was there from Monday to Friday, and I'd go home on weekends. And sometimes I wouldn't go home on weekends either. And when I was in high school, I was a cheerleader, so I wouldn't always go home on weekends. And I loved being in town. I had lots of people to play with, and I didn't have anybody on the farm. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
enjoyable.
So that, I mean, what kind of relationship do you have with your parents then? You're not really seeing them that much. I mean,
It was different. Yeah, it was hard. I mean, mom would call every day. I had to have to talk to her every day in the
yeah.
evening and make sure
And
that I was
you were
behaving myself.
unintentionally talking to Aunt Rose too, it sounds like. You-
Yeah, we kept her posted. My grandmother had, as I said, my sister and a cousin, female cousin, and my brother had a male cousin. That the four of them stayed in grandma's house, and I stayed with grandma as well. And then they all graduated, and another cousin came to stay. I don't know if you remember Richard Konichek, but he was
Yeah,
a
Dick
cousin that
Konichek.
was there. We became very good friends. I actually think he took me to school my first day of school.
Oh, so how
And
many people are like living in this house when you're living there? Like, does it vary? Like, is it like three, four,
it was
five?
there were always at least 5 people there.
Wow. So Grandma Jonas
She
had a
was
lot.
older when we went to live with her. God bless her heart. She put up with a lot.
I was gonna say, I mean, you've got this 70 what some year old woman and like
Yeah,
5 kids. That's a full house. That really is.
yeah. And she
Yeah.
cooked meals for all of us, and she was a really good cook. And she loved having people there. I think she enjoyed the fact that I was there after everybody left. I was the only one there with her for, I don't know, 4 years, high
Yeah.
school.
So, and how big is this a big house or what is it like?
It wasn't terribly big. She had a big kitchen and a bedroom and a living room downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs. So the older kids, high school kids, slept upstairs. Uncle Martin did not finish high school because it was the Second World War, and all the hired men that worked on farms were drafted and sent to war. So Grandpa took him out of school. He said he's got to. I'm sorry, and a lot of guys did that. A lot of
Yeah.
young guys did that. They had to go to the farm and work, and they didn't finish school during that period of time during the Second World War. Then when he was 18, he was drafted and he was sent to China as an 18-year-old kid off the farm. I don't know how he survived, but he did. And your grandfather, Bob Shanka, got into this REA business, and he knew all the senators and congressmen from Nebraska. And as I said before, he met Truman and Roosevelt once upon a time because of the REA, Rural Electrification Association. He was very prominent in electrifying farms in Nebraska. So anyway, he called one of the congressmen and he said, I need my son at home.
Yeah,
I
you
can't
said
have him gone anymore. And Martin was very embarrassed. They got him home 6 months
yeah.
early. And he was a Marine, and he thought that was terribly embarrassing. He didn't think that was a good thing.
So kind of getting back to the house, like where is it in relation to Schuyler? Is it kind of on the north side or
It's
what?
southwest
Okay.
of town. It doesn't. So I mean, they've built up around it a lot now, so
Yeah.
it's not as it was on the edge of town. She had a lot of space, and there wasn't a lot of traffic and stuff like that there.
And then how did you get to school from the house every day? Did you take a
Oh,
bus?
I'd walk. It was probably
You
a
walked
mile, and then they
up and
built the
down?
high school. They um, rebuilt a high school, and it was like only a couple blocks from her house, like 4 or 5 blocks. So
Oh, that's
I had
nice.
it easy then. We'd walk home from school. I had like 2 or 3 good high school friends,
Yeah.
and I'd walk home from school and we'd stand in the corner and talk for about half an hour, and then we'd go home.
Cool, cool. And what's Skylar like? It's mostly Czech people or what?
It is no longer mostly Czech people. It was Bohemian and Irish, and we were never, I could not look at an Irish boy or date an Irish boy while I was in high school. I certainly took off after that when I graduated from high
I
school.
was gonna
But
say that plan didn't last long, but and like were there a lot of first generation Czechs anymore? Or are these mostly second and third generation?
no, I'm 4th generation born in America,
Yeah.
totally Czech. So a lot of us were 3 or 4 generations born in America. And
Yeah.
we kept that ethnic group together, like all immigrants did when they first came to America. They
Yeah.
try and stay close to their ethnic group.
So it's mostly Czech people and a smattering of Irish, but you can't be
Mhm.
running with the Irish
The
boys.
Irish were mostly I think they were mostly the people in town, the merchants. And we all spoke Czech because they had to sell to the Czech people, so they had to know some Czech.
So what's there to do in downtown Schuyler? Speaking of merchants and businesses, like what would you guys do?
Oh, we had a couple restaurants. I remember Mac McKenzie had a restaurant. I worked for him for a little while when I was about in the 8th grade,
Yeah.
waiting tables. And then my mother's cousin, Leona Picorni, and her husband, Adolf, had a restaurant, the Top Notch was called.
I remember that place.
And we hung out in that place too. And Judy, their daughter, was one of my good friends. And her whole family, we were good friends because we're kind of related. So I hung out with her, and we'd go, we wouldn't eat much at the restaurant because we'd go to their house and eat afterwards.
Yeah, the Top
Anyway.
Notch, that was still running when we were kids in Schuyler,
Yeah,
Nebraska. I
it
can remember
was.
going there.
It is
I
no
didn't know that was
longer. I don't think it's been torn
yeah,
down.
I'm sure. Yeah, but I didn't know that that was the Picornis. I didn't know that they were related. That's
Yep.
interesting. Yeah.
Yep. She was a Folda, and my mother was a Folda, of course.
Okay.
My mother was a Jonas, but I mean,
Yeah.
my grandmother was a Folda.
So there's the Top Notch, and it sounds like everyone in town is Catholic pretty much then, if everyone's Bohemian or Irish.
Yeah, we had 2 Catholic churches because, of course, we couldn't go to church with the Irish people.
Of course not.
So we had to build our own church. Then we couldn't have a Catholic school because we couldn't possibly go to school with the Irish Catholics. So they built their own church, and we built our own church, and that was it. Daddy said we built the church that they came and took away. They didn't take it away. The Bullhunks moved out and moved into their own church because the Irish came and joined them in church, and that wasn't a possibility. We
Yeah,
couldn't
there goes
share.
the neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in like Bohunk, you mean Bohemian again. You mean Czech people.
He was your friend.
Right.
and
Mr.
you had a boy that was near our age.
Right.
So
We had one of my best friends, Sally Murdoch, her dad owned the bakery, and we'd hang out there.
And the
And they
bakery
had
is
a
making
son
those.
that was like Molly's age. They had 4 or 5 kids, and he was the youngest kid. He was Danny Shanka's age, I think.
and then the Ben Franklin.
Yep.
And we made out.
Yeah, Ben Franklin Dime Store. We'd hang out there.
Oh, yeah, Ben Franklin. I remember that place.
Yep.
Grandma used to buy me Star Wars toys there and stuff when I was really little.
Yep.
That was still, yeah, Ben Franklin. They were like a drugstore, right? I always called it the toy store, but they kind of
There was a
sold
drugstore close to it, but it was a dime store.
Yeah. So odds and ends, basically.
Soda shop?
It didn't have a soda shop in it, I don't think. Maybe it did for a while. And then it
Mhm.
closed that part, and it was just a dime store.
What was the name of the church you went to?
St. Mary's, and the other
St. Mary.
one was St. Augustine.
Was St. Augustine the sinful Irish one, or
Yep.
yeah? So did you ever dare go into St. Augustine?
Oh, sure. I mean, after a while. And it was closer to Grandma's house, so sometimes I'd go to mass during the week, especially in the summertime, and if I was in town, and I could walk there so I'd go to that church instead of my church. But yeah, that was scandalous.
Well, Well, you went, that was the point, right?
Yeah.
And
was fun.
that would have been an all Latin mass back then, right?
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's, what Jim McVeigh was saying was good about that was it actually didn't matter your ethnicity because it was all Latin anyway. So
So Katie always talked about the fact that we'd go to church and Father Herman was Bohemian. So the sermon would always be in Bohemian. So she said, you and I got nothing out of the mass because it was in Latin, so you didn't understand the Latin. And then he'd say the sermon in Bohemian. So we didn't know Bohemian very well. My parents and my grandparents tried to teach the older kids. I mean, Katie and Martin were 10 and 12 years older than I was. And I was like the baby almost of the family. There was hardly anybody my age, but so I was kind of the baby. So by the time it got to me, they did not teach me very much Czech. It rather than teach me Czech so I could understand it, they wanted to speak Czech to each other so I wouldn't understand it. So they didn't teach me a lot of Czech.
So your parents spoke Czech or pretty good Czech or what?
Oh yeah, they were fluent in both Czech and.
Okay. But they're third generation.
I was embarrassed because they spoke another language. I thought, oh my gosh, people don't do that anymore, but people did do that. And I was embarrassed because they spoke two languages. Didn't realize how intelligent that was.
So they're third generation, but they're still speaking fluent Czech. So that community really survived a pretty long time then.
It did, uh-huh.
Yeah.
It did until, I don't remember, they built a packing plant there and imported a lot of Hispanics to work in the plant. And it's now mostly Hispanic. I think it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, last time I was there, where were they from? I think there were a lot of people from Africa, like
oh yeah, there were
or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, but
yeah.
I mean, but it's interesting to me that it's
Somalia,
three generations.
they were Somalians. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 3 generations in, but all the adults in your world are still speaking Czech to each other. That's really
yeah.
yeah.
And they had I was looking it up one day not too long ago. One of the biggest populations is in eastern Nebraska of Bohemians.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, I remember going to the cemetery and everybody was Data Czech or Jedlika or something like that. And
yeah.
Well, that's really neat. But in any case, this is pretty much a white town, I would say, right? I mean, were there any non-Caucasian?
Yeah, it was pretty white.
Were there any like people of color or non-Caucasians in town or not really?
When I was a kid, there were not. There was one family and they left.
Yeah.
Because they were the only family, I suppose. And I would imagine there was some prejudice. I don't know. It was a different time and they probably didn't enjoy living there very much.
Yeah. So, well, cool. Well, I still haven't quite figured out Zoom, so I'm gonna have to end this. I wish I could talk longer, and so does everyone else.
That's okay.
But
We'll
yeah,
do it
this
again.
was a lot of fun, and yeah, talk to you. What's your schedule like next week, like Sunday or Monday or whatever?
I'll be around anytime.
All right. Well, cool. Well, Mom and Molly, good to talk to you. And
You too, Ortman.
yeah, and I'll call you in a second. I'm running out of Zoom time here, but I'll call you guys soon. All right, cool. Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.
Always.
Always. All right. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Okay, yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So Grandma, what do you like doing for dinner? I know it's